Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work at SWAN, but I wanted to start by telling you more about myself and my personal journey. And my journey, my story really starts with my family's story, and in particular, my mother's story. And this is my mother. My parents are immigrants from India, and when I was growing up as a child in New York City, I could palpably feel that my mother had been through something in her past that I didn't know about. I felt her pain. I don't know if this is something common between mothers and daughters or parents and children, but I wanted to protect her. I wanted to defend her. I wanted to help her. I wanted to make it all better. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that my mother took me aside. And she explained to me that she had been married before, that her first husband in India was very abusive, and that she was caught in this relationship that she ended up fleeing from. She fled the marriage. She converted to Christianity because Hindu law would not allow her a divorce at that time. She fled to the United States. She left her family behind in India. She felt small and worthless. She felt that Indian society had cast her out. And so she was carrying all of this with her for decades. She was unable to conceive a child for years because of the abuse. And so when I was born, I was like some kind of miracle child. And I didn't really know any of this. I didn't understand any of this. My father has a different story, but he was a huge personality, still is a huge personality. He was very domineering, and I felt like that was just way too much pressure for one person to handle. Because my mother had me so late, I had no brothers and sisters to sort of process any of this with. And so when I was in my early 20s, I completed my rebellion and I joined the military, which is not what good Indian girls do, in case you were wondering. This is me with a group of Marines, mostly infantry guys. I volunteered. I was the second woman volunteer to do a close combat martial arts black belt training program in the Marine Corps when they finally opened up that, among dozens of other programs that are still off limits to women, but they finally opened that one up, and I dove in for that one. It was so exciting. And this is us in a mud pit filled with pepper spray, so it was a good time. The Marine Corps was a shock for me. I had no idea what I was getting into. In retrospect, I had replaced one familial patriarch with an institutional patriarch, right? But this institutional patriarch was extremely violent, extremely aggressive, and not good for my health in any way. But I loved it. I loved it, and I sucked it up for 5 years. I faced daily harassment. I witnessed daily harassment. I was exposed to horrible things that I wouldn't want to share with anybody, but I ended up sharing it really with the world over time. I was in Thailand for 3 months, for example, on a deployment, and witnessing thousands of my fellow Marines and sailors sexually exploiting the women and girls of Thailand. This is something that still I carry with me like a burden. I haven't processed it. How do you process that? I was in uniform too, right? These are the kinds of things that happen in the background, even though they're happening on such a large scale. We haven't even begun to understand what that means as a country. And when I was in my final unit, I was a company commander in charge of 450 Marines, teaching them combat skills, sending them off to Iraq and Afghanistan after that, hopefully with the skills to survive. And an officer in my unit was sexually harassing all the women. And it was mostly a male unit. It was an infantry environment. And so I decided to do what any person with any ounce of self-preservation would not have done, which is commit career suicide. And I said, my mother did not raise me to put up with this bullshit. And so I not only raised a stink, I raised it through my chain of command, but when they, as you may have heard in the news, squashed that complaint and swept it under the rug, I went outside the chain and filed an independent investigation. And this ended my career. I got out with an honorable discharge, but I was really traumatized. I had seen and witnessed so much at that point, held it down like good Marines do, but it all came to the surface after I left. And so our work really grew out of the common experiences of betrayal and trauma and harassment of women in uniform. It was a collective effort to help heal our community. And nobody had ever done this before. Nobody had named these discriminations and abuses and called it rape and called it harassment and called it assault and called it discrimination and never said sorry for it, right? And so we did that. These issues are really mainstream now. I mean, it's remarkable. It's a huge success. But 5 years ago, the folks who are taking these issues on today didn't care. I mean, they considered these issues just a huge political liability, even the well-known ones who are in the news today. This is the type of culture that still exists in the military, but this is my favorite poster of all the posters that have come out of the military. It's "Ask her when she's sober," and we raised such a stink about this one. Preventing sexual assault is part of my duty. So the military is really, I would argue, about 25 years behind where the rest of our country is in terms of sexual assault understanding, rape culture, rape mythology understanding, still conflates alcohol awareness with rape awareness. You know, alcohol is not a tool of the predator, it's just some random factor in an assault. This next one, you can avoid becoming a victim. This is as recent as last year in the Air Force. Avoid becoming a victim by socializing with people who share your values. That is a good one. And I brought a prop for all of you. I hope you can see this color. It's a nice hot pink. Right? This is a rape whistle. I feel very safe carrying this rape whistle around with me. But the DoD has been giving these whistles to women, not to men, but to women in uniform across the branches. Women deployed in Afghanistan today have their rape whistles, and there's nothing, I can tell you, that makes you feel like you belong to the unit, like a bright pink rape whistle attached to your flak jacket in Afghanistan. I mean, it's shocking, really. A lot changed last year. When Senator Gillibrand decided to take this on as a major political issue, we helped her form and write the legislation that is now considered a mainstream topic of conversation. We're trying to professionalize the military justice system. It's just as simple as that. Commanders have too much bias, take them out of the process. This was the first hearing that she hosted as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. These veterans are just remarkable, remarkable advocates. That's my wall of support from the Army. And a couple months later, with more support, more media frenzy that we placed in terms of political pressure on Republicans and Democrats, this hearing was held with the Joint Chiefs facing off with the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I testified on a panel after this, but this just says everything. If you want to know why there's so little progress in the military, this is your answer, right? What you don't see is on the wings, on the left and right wings around the senators, you see some of these faces. And this made all the difference. This has made an enormous difference. It's why our issue has come so far in the last couple of years. Republicans and Democrats alike. You know, some of these women have been trial attorneys. They've been judges. They've faced down rapists in courts, and they're not putting up with any bullshit. This is one of my favorite people, Sarah Plummer, a Marine Corps veteran who has participated in a lot of our events and trainings and summits on military sexual violence, and has become an amazing advocate herself. As many of us know, the trauma of rape or harassment doesn't end after the incident is over. You carry that with you for years, sometimes a lifetime. And this country has silenced survivors for decades. We are not the first people to raise this issue. But with so many of us coming forward and speaking, we have elevated the voices of other folks who have suppressed their own trauma or have been told that they've been lying or that their trauma doesn't count. Ruth Moore is a Navy veteran who filed post-traumatic stress disorder benefits with the Department of Veterans Affairs and was denied. She waited 26 years to get that passed, and she is one of the faces of VA reform today. Women in the military still face an enormous amount of traditional stereotyping. These women broke a lot of boundaries in Afghanistan, serving alongside the infantry, but the New York Times, in their infinite wisdom, said they expected tea, not firefights. And I can tell you, no one joins the Marines to drink tea and eat crumpets. These 4 women became our individual plaintiffs in a major lawsuit against the Department of Defense, against Secretary Hagel. They're combat veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, been there, done that, Purple Heart and Distinguished Flying Cross awards for their combat duty. And we got them together and sued the Department of Defense because we wanted to end the last vestige of legalized sex discrimination in the United States of America. These women did it, and yet there was still a blanket policy denying women access to combat assignments. A few months later, Secretary of Defense lifted that ban. Historic. It was a 20-year ban. Best selfie ever, right? Does anybody recognize this? So in the middle, you've got the photographer, Private First Class Harley Rambo Bradford, and her 3 friends. The 4 of them were the first 4 women to pass enlisted infantry training in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps opened up these schools to women. These women did the exact same tasks as their brothers in arms, but the guys were allowed to join the infantry. They were assigned to infantry units right after graduation. These 4 women, not so much. What do we do next? Where are we going from here? There's a lot legislatively and agency-wise still to be done, but this is part of the problem. This is a photo of the heads of all the major national veterans organizations, and I don't need to, ask you what they all have in common. The only two guys of color are the president and General Shinseki, who heads up the VA, and both of them are not going to be around for much longer. What SWAN is doing is training the next generation of women veterans to become national security leaders, to be the ones who are talking to all of you. When you flip on the television, I want you to see them on MSNBC and Fox News, talking foreign policy, talking about military justice reform. There's a lot that needs to be done to cultivate women veterans leadership, and so we founded a fellowship in leadership and public policy to create that next cohort, that next generation of voices. This is Colonel Martha McSally. She's running for Congress in Arizona. You might know Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. These women are incredible, but they're very few, and we want to change the face of U.S. foreign policy and national security by training women one-on-one with these skills to do what these women are doing. Something shifts when a woman tells her story, when a woman is able to recognize and name something that's happened to so many others that has remained nameless and maybe a matter of shame or guilt. We've done that at SWAN. We're still doing it. I have been healed. My healing process started with SWAN. It's still a process, but I feel so much more supported by my fellow women veterans. When we started out, even women veterans weren't supportive of our work. There's so much self-hatred. There's so much internalized hatred. But I believe things are changing. I believe we're going to have a woman commander-in-chief very soon. And wouldn't it be remarkable, wouldn't it be something if the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee was a woman senator when that commander-in-chief took her post? And wouldn't it be amazing if the commander-in-chief's chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a 4-star woman admiral or general? And there are 2 4-star women generals right now in the military. Just imagine that world. Right? And let's make that happen. We can do it. Thank you very much.
That was great. That was really wonderful.